Hey everyone, this is Seth Blaustein, and today we're going to do a follow-up with Stephen Kotler, who is one of our seed speakers at the 2014 Voice and Exit Festival in Austin. And Stephen is the director of research at Flow Genome Project, which is an incredible just alchemy of brilliant minds coming together around researching flow states, how we can continue that research in ways that kind of lead to practical applications of it, which I think is incredibly exciting. He's also the author of some incredible books like Abundance, Rise of Superman, and most recently, Bold, How to Go Big, Create Wealth, and Impact the World, which he co-wrote with Peter Diamandis, who is also a total badass. And I haven't had a chance to get my hands on that book yet, but I've heard amazing things from some friends. So congrats on that, by the way, Stephen.
Thanks, Seth.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
and thanks for joining me. So I want to assume a little bit of basic knowledge about flow states for our listeners. And if you are not familiar with what a flow state is, I would definitely recommend checking out Stephen's seed talk from the 2014 Voice and Exit. It's a great primer on it, a little bit of a story about Stephen. And essentially, in a sentence or two, a flow state is an optimal state of consciousness, which pushes performance through the roof on a number of different dimensions. So assuming some basic knowledge about that, you talked a little bit about how the research in flow is like a child, it's a baby. We know very little right now about exactly how far it can go. And we know that extreme sports athletes are engaging in activities and environments that really produce flow on a massive scale. But everyone is kind of picking at, interested in how these realizations can be applied to things like productivity, creativity, entrepreneurship, et cetera, without needing to throw double backflips off a cliff, as fun as that, would be. So what do you think a few practical changes people could make would be to find flow states more regularly or in different, more conventional settings?
So as it turns out, and you're not wrong, by the way, the research is really in its infancy, right? That said, we've got 150 years of psychology, 25 years of neurobiology, right? Physiology, what's going on in the body, it's kind of a black hole. Like the measurement technology we need to start looking at it is showing up right now as we talk, right? That said, what we do know, to answer your question, is that flow states have triggers. Right now we know of about 18 different triggers. These are preconditions that lead to more flow, right? And the first thing that you need to know is the most obvious. Flow is about attention. Flow can only take place when all of your attention, all of your focus is completely in the present moment, in the now, is to use that horrible phrase. But, right, horrible phrase, but we got to use it. It's true. So these triggers, if you strip everything else away, they're focusing techniques. They're all the ways that evolution shaped our brain to pay attention to the present moment, right? So they're deeply hardwired in all of us. And we know flow is ubiquitous, so it can show up anywhere, in anyone, provided certain initial conditions are met. The reason action and adventure sport athletes are so important to this discussion is because they gave us a data set with which to work. We actually could say, okay, these guys have to be in flow to throw those double backflips. So we know, we don't have to wonder if they're in flow, and we can work backwards, and it's led us to these triggers. These triggers, though, can be applied anywhere. Let me give you a simple example and kind of map it from one world to the other. The most obvious thing you think about when you think about action and adventure sport athletes is the massive amount of risk they're taking, right? Risk is a focusing mechanism. It's an amazing focusing mechanism. Literally under the hood, whenever we take a risk, the brain releases dopamine, which is a primary focusing chemical. It drives attention into the now, right? It's also a big reward drug and does a bunch of other things, but focuses our attention. Same thing with norepinephrine, which also gets released whenever we take a risk. Here's the cool part. You don't have to take a physical risk. You can take an emotional risk, a creative risk, a social risk. In fact, your brain can't tell the difference between social risk and physical risk. Same brain structures process them. It sounds kind of puzzling, right? Like, why the hell would that be? Think about it. You go back 200, 300 years and you screwed up socially, right? And you got banished, exiled. You didn't live. It was a capital crime. It was capital punishment. Nobody could live apart from the tribe. So the brain, because it's very old and has been doing this a long time, processes physical pain and physical risk in the same place it processes social pain and social risk. So you can swap these things out. You need risk, but it doesn't have to be physical, and it's totally proportional. So Laird Hamilton has to paddle into a 50-foot wave at Jaws to pull this trigger. But the shy guy has to raise his hand in the business meeting and just speak up with his great new idea, right? It is totally proportional. Now, at an organizational level, though, Seth, this tells us something really interesting. It says that organizations that rely on rapid experimentation, trying things out, trying things out, trying things out. And Jeff Bezos has a great quote that we talk about in Bold, where he says the success of Amazon is directly proportional to the number of experiments we run per year, per month, per week, right? But if you're going to run these wild experiments, you have to take lots of risks, and you're going to fail. So you need that fail-forward Silicon Valley attitude here if you're running that kind of organization. If you're not, it's just your own life. You still need it in your own life, because if you take lots of risks, you're going to fail over and over and over again, and you're going to have to deal with that. But the upside is you're going to have much greater access to flow as a result, and performance, productivity, motivation, creativity, all the things you get are going to come online more frequently. Now, this is only one of 17 triggers. So if you don't, risk is not your thing, right? There's plenty of other gateways in. In fact, just to do this, creativity. When we make connections between ideas, the brain also releases dopamine. And you've had this experience. You filled out a crossword puzzle, get an answer right, get that little rush of pleasure and focus. That's dopamine, right? Whenever we link ideas together creatively, pattern recognition, you get more dopamine. There are ways to create conditions for pattern recognition in the brain. It triggers more flow. So if you don't want to take the physical risks or social or spiritual or whatever, fine, go over here. Try creativity. Lots of different ways in.
That's fascinating. I actually really want to sit on that risk as a factor for a second, because that's really interesting. Would you say risk could be, you could say, synonymous with fear, like using that as a compass for where your risk areas are in your life?
Well, I've said this in Rise, and I've said this before. For me, one of the things I've gained from this is that, to me, and I'm a very fearful guy. I know that sounds very strange because I do these action sports. I spend a lot of time public speaking. I do all these things that scare people. I have a lot of fear. The only difference with me is that I discovered very early on in my life that if I go straight at the thing that I'm afraid of, there's amazing success on the other side. That's where the greatest joy, that's where the greatest reward and the most flow is. So personally, when I get really nervous and uncomfortable and scared, I go, okay, I don't like how this feels, but suck it up because I'm going in the right direction. So I literally use fear as a way to steer by. And I'm always saying to my teams, no matter what the project is, Flow Genome Project stuff, it could be people working, with me on my books and whatever. My common question is, are we going big enough? Is there an idea we haven't thought of that we haven't tried? What's the craziest thing we can do here? What's the most risk we can take? Where does it get really, really scary? Because those things lead in really interesting directions. And if you're interested in ultimate performance, if you're interested in world-changing tasks like we talk about in Bold, right? Changing the world for the better, that kind of stuff, you're going to need to learn to love risk. Arianna Huffington talks about risk as a muscle. And she's absolutely right? You got to practice it over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I like, what you said about, risk is very perceptual. It's very specific to the individual's perceptions of what risk means. And like you said, you can either throw a double backflip, or risk for someone might be to walk across the bar and talk to the girl. So it's highly specific to, like the personal growth areas of the individual. And, when people talk about like living life at its highest potential, I always wanted to dig deeper. Like, what are you actually saying by that? And I've come to kind of think of that as like, are you operating at the fringes of your abilities? Are you kind of working at that perimeter of where your abilities are? And when you hit that, you know you're at the perimeter when you have fear. Because fear is kind of that recognition of, I don't know what's going to result from this. I'm not sure. I don't feel comfortable. And so, in a lot of ways, it seems like a flow state is kind of this like reward for experiencing, the expanded edge of your potential.
Well, you're absolutely correct in a lot of different ways. Let's start kind of on the beginning. The most famous flow trigger of all is a psychological trigger known as the challenge skills ratio. What this means is we pay the most attention to what we're doing when the challenge, the task at hand, slightly is the key, exceeds our skill level. So you definitely want to stretch. You are outside your comfort zone, right? But you don't want to snap. If you push too far, and we see this, by the way, peak performers, high performers make this mistake all the time. If you're wired like me, you will take on tasks that are 30% greater than your skill set, 40% greater, 50%, just because you're wired that way. And the truth of the matter is you actually got to go for slightly smaller challenges. And the secret isn't the big risk leap, right? It's a little bit every day, but you have to commit to it every day and every day and every day. And you're right. Flow is sort of the reward for pushing outside your comfort zone and for when you get to level up, right? When a flow state shows up, it means that all those skills you were trying to learn, whatever, they've come together, right? They've come together and you're getting these emergent properties, these elevated properties as a result. But it's absolutely the payoff, and it's a real payoff, right? Flow is incredibly intrinsically motivating. People talk about it as the source code of intrinsic motivation. So once an experience starts producing flow, you go really far out of your way to get more of it.
Yeah, and so taking that realization of it's 4%, right? You know, roughly that's what they've discovered is like 4% outside of your abilities. However the hell you measure that, I don't know.
Okay, and I have to say that was that number, and we're really cautious with that number. Back of the envelope calculation between Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, so the godfather of flow psychology, and a Google mathematician, and they said, God, we think it's a 4% difference.
Okay.
We said, what the hell is that? That doesn't make any sense, but it's interesting. So what I literally did is I mapped the place I ski and the place I mountain bike, and where I was as a rider, where I was as a skier, and how difficult every obstacle, you know, whatever. And I tried just to push 4% over the course of a season. Let's just see, does this work, right? And what I discovered is two things. First of all, I didn't plateau. You normally in a season, I would a couple flow states early on, things get exciting, and I plateau. My skills plateau until the very end of the season. I didn't plateau. I kept advancing, kept advancing, kept advancing. And the same thing happened in ski season. The next year I said, okay, that was crazy. I tried it. I had a bunch of friends try it, and we ran a loose experiment. It worked for them as well. So that number is so unvalidated. It's, you know, it's not even, we shouldn't even be talking about it out loud. And where it is hard to find, of course, and totally individual. But I do think it's kind of accurate. I wish we could quantify it better.
Yeah. And so, okay, so when you're on the mountain, you kind of looked for, you know, this looks maybe 10 feet bigger of a drop than I'm used to, which is about maybe 5% more.
I used a combination of my own fear level. How much did this thing scare me? From like where I am now, I said, okay, here's a 10-foot road gap. Here's a 5-foot tabletop jump. Well, the 5-foot tabletop jump, totally in my skill set, sweet spot. The 10-foot road gap, that scares me too much. So 4% is probably right in the middle. And let's find a 7-foot road gap or something. That thing. Totally loose, totally informal. But the good thing about, especially downhill mountain biking, is because they're fixed obstacles. They don't move. I know, you know, on Monday, if I jump a 5-foot gap, it's 5 feet on Tuesday as well, right? Yeah. So it allowed me to kind of stay in like 4%. I could actually do it mathematically a little. So again, not rigorous. But the effects I got were so astounding, and so in 2 seasons doing this, I think I progressed as much as I did the previous 10 years as an athlete. I've never seen anything like it, right? Now, I have tried very hard to apply those same things in my writing as a creative, right? This is flow. It's not the action sport athletic stuff is fun. My business is writing. I got to put words together in a straight line every day, no matter what, right? So creativity requires a lot of flow, all this stuff. So I found that 4% for me, that sweet spot is, I feel like I'm being a little too honest. Like I'm showing you a little bit too much of myself in my writing, and I'm laying out I'm laying out an idea for the you know, in public that is a little farther than I've ever, you know, pushed my ideas before in public and talked about it. So like a little bit uncomfortable. When I'm a little bit uncomfortable, I know my writing is in that sweet spot. So, you know, it's hard to apply. It's very individual, and you have to conduct the experiment. We say this at the Flow Genome Project over and over and over again. Nobody can do your push-ups for you. You have to conduct the experiment, right?
Yeah. So would you say, you know, if someone was trying to discover, okay, where are my 4% areas? You know, if I think about it like, does it scare me? Okay, and how would I rate my fear on a scale of 1 through 100? If it's in that first 10%, would you say that would be a decent litmus test for, okay, it's a little outside of my...
Well, it's on a scale of 1 to 10. If it's in the first, right, in there. If on a scale of 1 to 100, it'd be in the first 40%.
Okay, gotcha.
Factor up.
So yeah, because I think what you just brought up, that connection to writing, how you identify it in writing, having people look and examine their life and, where are the areas that I have fear, and is there a growth potential in that area? And am I in that 40th, 4 out of 10 scale of fear with it? That could be a potential flow trigger for me if I engaged in that activity.
For sure. I mean, you want to add in risk, you want to add the challenge, skills, balance. You want to, if you read Rise of Superman, which is the book I wrote on all this, they're all kind of broken out. And we know, by the way, nature nurture reasons. A lot of this has to do with genetics, and there's nothing you can do about it. Different people are susceptible to different triggers, right? Let me give you an example. There's an altruism-based flow state known as helper's high. It was discovered by Alan Lukes, who founded Big Brother, His Big Sister. It literally, the gateway into helper's high is through helping others. We think it's because with the other people and other people's needs there, it focuses attention, it does a bunch of things. We think it's woven in with the social triggers. We don't really understand it. But usually people who love the altruism-based stuff don't love risk, I've discovered. It tends to be either or, one way or the other. I don't know why that is, but like a lot of it just seems to work that way. It's different things for different people. A lot of it has to do with dopamine receptors and neurochemistry and a whole bunch of stuff like that, and we don't totally understand it at all. But what you need to do is experiment kind of with all of them. You certainly want 2 or 3 or 4 of them in combination to really kick you into flow. The more the merrier. You don't have to try to, there's no way to layer in the 17 because 7 of them or 8 of them are about individual flow and 10 of them are for triggering group flow, the shared collective version of this experience. There's some overlap, but the group flow triggers aren't going to work for producing individual flow and vice versa.
Awesome. And so when you're thinking about, you said this is in its infancy, the research into flow. What do you think are the key questions right now that research could seek to answer that would give us a better understanding of how we can consciously replicate these states for broader demographics, or help identify if altruism is your trigger, or if risk is your highest, most your biggest impact trigger?
The easiest way to answer that is to tell you what we're doing at the Flow Genome Project, which the first step is, right now, if I want to know you're in a flow state, the only established scientific method is to give you a questionnaire, a survey, right? It's extremely well validated. There's 50 years of research and testing. It's kind of probably one of the most well-validated questionnaires in all of science. We know it's solid. It's still subjective, right? And it doesn't give us in-the-moment data, right? Like if I want to compare the flow you get into it as a musician playing in a band versus the flow a football player gets on a field versus the flow public speaker gets versus somebody coding software, right? Those would be interesting comparisons. I can't do it other than wait for the experience to pass and give you this questionnaire. We want a biophysical-based flow detector. And what's cool about that is sensors and networks, smart health, biotechnology, all these things are accelerating exponentially right now. So when I started writing Rise of Superman, by the way, I thought a biophysical-based flow detector, something that could, look at everything from microfacial expressions to pupil dilation to brain waves to blood chemistry, all that. I thought we were at least 10 years out. I think it could be done within a year, 2 years. Like, technology is moving so fast. So for me, that's the first step. Once we can, say, okay, this person is in a low-grade microflow state, this is a macro flow state, we can really start building what we call the heat map for flow. Heat map for flow is literally like, if you're this kind of person, this is your access to flow. These are the things. And by the way, we have a crew version of that. If you go to the Flow Genome Project website, right, there's a free flow profile on there that anybody can take, and it says, based on this information, these are the areas in your life you're most likely to find flow. Do more of these things. So we're already at the front end of that. We want to make that as rigorous and scientific as possible, and we want to bring this to scale, right? We want the biggest data set we can possibly get.
Yeah, that's really exciting to see what's going to be coming out along those lines. And, especially with like the risk and pushing that 4%, I'm wondering if you could, there must be a way to have some kind of biophysiological measure of a fear response, right? And then you could potentially, hypothetically, put that on a snowboarder as they're going and see right before they do something, what was that fear, what scale did it push to? Was it in that 4th percentile? Are you guys looking at stuff like that with regards to studying particularly risk and?
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll take it one step back, right? We're interested at the front end of the flow state. You get all the stress hormones. So there's cortisol, there's norepinephrine, there's adrenaline, right? What level that gets to is essentially how much fear you're feeling. So we definitely want that kind of data. In fact, this is kind of cool. It's very hard to measure neurochemicals, right? I can't put a sensor in your brain, but it turns out that norepinephrine, principal anxiety fear chemical, pupil dilation correlates directly to it. So we can use a Wi-Fi Connect sensor built into kind of a goggles, like ski goggles or something like that, to measure pupil dilation. And it should, hypothetically, we're still working on this, correlate with fear response.
That is fascinating. Awesome. Okay, so shifting a little bit, if we consider, which this is one of my favorite lines in your talk, and when you reference the McKinsey study, it talks about how CEOs were 500% more productive in flow states, and making the illusion that you could come in on Monday and get 1 day's worth of work done in flow and be done for the week and get as much done as other people who are in a steady state. So if I'm a CEO and I've got $1 million and I want to maximize productivity through flow, and I'm specifically putting it towards that purpose in my organization, in my startup, what do you think would be a good way to do that in order to put those resources to work or to maximize flow?
It's a loaded question, Trina. My answer is do what we do. Hire the Flow Genome Project. We'll come in and we'll train up your whole staff in all the techniques you need to do to maximize flow, right? Like, I don't know of anybody else out there who's working at the level we are with this stuff. I just but we already, we do this regularly with, and it's all in business, primarily, by the way. And one of the things you get from flow, if you want to ultimate human performance, all the fancy language, but flow massively amplifies decision-making, especially high-speed, hot decision-making, where there's a lot of emotions involved and things like that. We do tremendous amounts of work in finance, in people who are working around the stock market. Anybody making high-speed decisions, we've been working with them because you can train up decision-making, right? So there's some interesting research in flow where essentially what happens in flow, right? We're trading conscious processing for subconscious processing. Well, we've now measured how much faster your subconscious is than your conscious mind at making decisions, and it's a 7-second gap. There's a 7-second gap. So
that's 7 seconds faster. Your unconscious is 7 seconds faster,
right? Wow. So Wayne Gretzky used to talk about being able to skate where the puck's going to be. That's what he meant, right? He's using flow to make high-speed decisions, and it almost feels like you can predict the future because you're literally moving 7 seconds faster than your conscious mind, which is how you're normally making decisions. So there's literally a measurable speed benefit to all this stuff. And it also, there's all kinds of studies show that the subconscious makes better decisions than the conscious mind. In fact, I'll give you a crazy one. There's a study that says, okay, Seth, I'm going to give you 100 facts about this new car, right? All these new cars. And then I want you to all read this stuff and buy a car, right? And we can rate how good of a decision you made, how good of a car you bought based on the information you're given. If I give you the same data and say, read all this stuff, then let me distract you. Subconscious processing can take over, meaning let's build model airplanes for 10 minutes or something along those lines. You will make better decisions afterwards. And it's off the charts better decisions. So we make faster, better decisions in flow. It opens up this whole high-speed decision-making, which, in business today, right, the speed of business is incredible. Babson School of Business just, said the average lifespan of a Fortune 500 company is 10 years. 40% of the Fortune 500 companies today are going to be gone in 10 years. And Richard Forrester at Yale said we've gone from 67 years in 1920 to 15 years that you're on that list today. That's the application of the speed of business. So I think understanding how to use flow to keep up is so fundamental. And, You know, there are lots of different ways to do it. You can go to the Flow Genome Project and start there. There's a lot of free ways to do this. If you're serious about it, I would suggest, you know, bringing us in and let's train you up. I'm sorry, I know that's a lousy, you know, answer. And I, you know, there are a lot. I will say there are a lot of. Since I wrote Rise, we know of 37 new companies in the past year that are all doing some kind of flow-based training. So there are a lot of other options out there. I personally am biased, but you know.
Hire Steven if you want that 500% increase.
I don't know what to tell. I don't know.
I agree. It's a complex. I realize it's an oversimplified question. Yeah. So okay, I want to go back to this. What you mentioned about the unconscious, because do you think that principle could go both ways? And what I mean by that is, do you think that maybe it's that we make when you say you make better decisions from your unconscious? Do you think that mostly applies to athletics and like regurgitation of information? Or because when I think of the unconscious, certain things can be, you know, trained into your unconscious, stories that we have about the way we live our life that can be actually a hindrance to your growth, and that those are operating 7 seconds faster than your conscious mind. And so how do you see that kind of interplay?
Well, so here's what you gain with the subconscious. And flow really, because there's a flow cycle, right? The flow state is one part of a cycle, and there's a part of the flow cycle where you're really using your conscious mind. So you sort of get a best of the both worlds thing going on here. But the subconscious has 3 advantages. One, it's very, very fast, right? As we've talked about. It also has almost unlimited RAM. Your working memory maximizes out at 7 items. And in most studies, they find you can kind of think about 4 things of information at once. The subconscious, unconscious, it's almost unlimited, right? So you can make huge pattern leaps and connections between ideas and all the things you need for creativity and innovation. Lastly, your conscious mind is very, 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 very energy expensive, right? Conscious thought we use 20, the brain at rest, right? Uses 25% of your energy, just doing nothing, just resting. And it goes up from there as we kind of get on task. Flow is extremely energy efficient. So we can think longer, harder, et cetera, et cetera. So it speeds up all those things. There are certainly things you want the conscious mind for. And one of the things that happens in flow is because of dopamine, pattern recognition, whatever, you get a lot of ideas. Not all of them are going to be good ones. You know what I mean? I want to write in flow. I want to edit when I'm out of flow, right? I think that's a really good balance. It's as close to perfect decision-making as you're going to get, and it's the best you're going to do in a high-speed decision-making situation. But if you have the chance to evaluate afterwards, do.
Interesting. Okay, cool. And just curious, if you have encountered anyone who is as good at self-inducing flow states as like a extreme sports athlete in a practical setting, like a CEO or something like that.
So entrepreneurship, startup entrepreneurship, serial entrepreneurship, all startups are massive flow generators, almost as much as extreme sports, right? They're sort of, the extreme sport of business, all the same triggers apply. So anytime I look at serial entrepreneurs, I'm looking at people who are really great at accessing flow. Anytime you're looking at an artist, a creative, and I don't care if you're coding software, you're writing books, or you're making movies, you're playing music, right? If you're at the top of your field, you are great at accessing flow because you can't do these jobs without it, right? So I think, I really believe that, people who are really great at flow, as a general rule, are at the top of all their fields. Like, that's what you see, right? To put it in different terms, Salim Ismail, who's the founding director of Singularity University, who's the former head of innovation at Yahoo, made a comment that we talk about in Rise. He says, look, anytime you pay money to go to a rock concert or go to a basketball game or go to a football game or watch a film or attend a poetry lecture or anything else, you are going to watch somebody in a flow state. And if you quantify it, you will find it's an enormous part of our GDP.
Interesting. So a lot of it is circumstantial too. I mean, you have the mountain for the snowboarder. You have a high speed decision making environment of the startup entrepreneur.
And I will, by the way, I will tell you, any talented public speakers, such a flow. I mean, I know from personal experience, and I've talked to hundreds of other speakers who've had this experience. There's this flow-based panic that happens where you give your talk, especially if you've got slides, right? You give your talk, you're in a flow state, and you come to your final slide, and there's a moment you look at the slide and you're like, oh my God, it's my final slide. What the hell did I say? I must have left something out, right? Like everybody has this moment of like, what just happened? And so because public speaking is the #1 fear in the world, right? I would say it's probably, one of the biggest flow generating environments as well.
Yeah, going back to using your fear as a little bit of a compass for where you can access flow states. So good. Transitioning into some of these technologies, and I want to talk about Bold a little bit. But are there any hard technologies that you've encountered that are good at reproducing flow states or at least helping in the process?
Well, there's a ton of technology, right? I mean, what's cool, Bold, one of the things Bold looks at is that, Bold is the idea that entrepreneurs can level up their game like never before, right? And one of the reasons this is possible is because we are getting access to so many exponentially accelerating technologies, neuroscience and biotechnology among them. To put it in context, Moore's law is what everybody knows about exponential technology, right? It says that your computer gets twice as fast for the same price every 18 months, year to 18 months, right? Biotechnology is now advancing at 5 times the speed of Moore's law. So it is doubling price and performance every 4 months. To put this in flow context, when I started all this work 15 years ago, I was absolutely certain we would never figure it out. We wouldn't solve it at all. And it is 15 years later, and we have mapped the neurobiology of flow. Sure, there's a ton of unanswered questions, and the practical application questions are even bigger. But we have a map. We know what brain neurochemicals are responsible. We want to know what brain waves are responsible. We know what brain structures are important. And to get back to where you started, we have the technology to mess with these things. There's a whole new suite of neurofeedback tools that are coming online that are really cool and really robust. We work with Sense Labs and the Versus headset.
Oh, yeah.
I'm holding right here.
Mm-hmm.
It's a phenomenal, one of the phenomenal technologies. And Leslie Shearlin used a version of this to do all the brainwave and flow research. So like literally what the groundbreaking research on brainwaves and neuroelectricity and flow, the device that it was done on is now accessible to compute consumers. There's a whole, flow, large portions of the prefrontal cortex get turned off. It's called transient hypofrontality, right? There's all kinds of ways to do this with transcranial magnetic stimulation and whatnot. There are now companies that do this. We've found that the same knocking out the prefrontal cortex doesn't just induce flow, but it's very good for treating anxiety and depression and things like that. So there are now companies that run around and do this. Like you can go to Neurostar is one of them, and it's kind of a secret weapon in Silicon Valley. A lot of people are using these techs.
Wow.
High performance. And the cool thing is, technologically, right, we're at the front. As far as the information revolution is concerned, and that's essentially what we're talking about, we know we're only 1% of the way into what's possible, right? So we're really at the front end of this. So we're going to get better and better and better and faster.
What was the thing, Neurostar, that you mentioned? I hadn't heard of that one.
I think I may have the company name wrong. It's Neurostar or sounds like Neurostar. Sorry about that. But they basically use low-grade electromagnetic waves, right, to knock out the prefrontal cortex in 20-minute sessions. It looks like you sit in a dentist chair, and they just pulse electricity through your brain for about 20 minutes, knocks out your prefrontal cortex. And by the way, everybody knows what I'm talking about. If you've gone for a hike, right, you 20, 25 minutes in, your brain shuts up, it gets really quiet. That's exercise-induced transient hypofrontality. It's the front edge of what we're talking about. This is just using, technology to produce that same effect, but it gives us freedom from ourselves. And it produces the front edge of the flow state. It has a lot of really big uplifting effects. Very powerful.
This is one of the most interesting things I think about the conversation about flow is between I guess you'd say like forced induced flow potentially if it becomes possible through technologies like this, and also just the impact of flow on your physiology. Like, it's high stress on the body, or would you say it is, to go through that flow state?
No, it's totally. It's the exact opposite. Wow, it's really interesting. So what happens as we move into flow is two things. First of all, all those stress hormones that we talked about get flushed out of your system. There's a global release of nitric oxide signaling molecule as you move into flow. All the stress hormones go away. They're replaced by all these feel-good neurochemicals: dopamine, serotonin, anandamide, endorphins. All of those chemicals do two things. One, they all boost the immune system, right? They're all big immune system boosters. Two, they reset the nervous system. Everything calms back down to zero. So there is so much more research that needs to be done here. I can't even begin to emphasize how little we know about this. But, are flow states good for your health? Massively, as far as we can tell.
And so how does that reconcile with the need for recovery after a flow state?
Well, that's just, so there's two different things going on, right? These are high energy states. The neurochemicals produced, even though they're beneficial, they're in limited supply. When you use them up, it takes a little while, certain nutrition, certain vitamins, minerals, sunlight, et cetera, to reproduce them, right? So there's this big high and there's a kind of a deep low that follows. It's a recovery phase, and you literally, you need to calm down. You need an active recovery, which, some kind of focused breathing meditation is useful. Saunas are useful. There's a lot of different ways to, move active recovery forward. But very, very useful, because it is taxing on the body, but its overall health benefit.
Right. So yeah, I shouldn't have used that word stress. Taxing is sort of what I was getting at, and I guess what I was getting at is, if we discover ways where you can just continuously pump flow, put yourself in flow, what do you see? Is there a risk in doing that? If people find a machine that knocks out,
I don't think it's possible. As far as the research shows, there's 4 stages to this cycle. The first stage is a struggle phase. You're not in flow. You're loading the brain with information. The last phase is a recovery phase, right? You have to move through the entire cycle to restart it. So, every now and again, as happens, people come up to me and they're like, I kind of live in a permanent flow state and you should study me. And I'm like, well, I don't know about that, because we have a word for that, and it's schizophrenia. It does not appear, this permanent, always-on flow state does not appear possible. What does seem possible is you can maximize the amount of flow in your life, and you can shorten the gaps between flow states. You can speed up that cycle, right? There is probably nutritional barriers. We don't have any food in flow. Nobody has a clue, right? I mean, I can talk nonsense at you, tell you what works for me, but what works for me does not work for the next guy, as far as we know at this point. So it doesn't look like you can, we don't know what all the precursors are to even get us in permanently, and I don't think it's possible. I don't want to, I'm loath to say something is impossible, but I don't understand the neurobiology at all.
Yeah, not until we can inject neurochemicals to replenish those.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That's actually the only concrete answer I've had that I think is worth a damn. That's a very insightful idea.
Interesting. Okay.
And a new drug company.
And a what?
And a new drug company.
Yeah. So, okay, with all of this knowledge about flow that you have, acknowledging that it's in the infancy, if you were to project 10 years in the future, as best as you could with the information that you have now, hope maybe tapping into your subconscious here, which might be able to answer this. What would you foresee for the human species? If we maximize these flow capabilities and understand them to the fullest degree that we can.
The only way I can answer what's possible looking forward is to look backwards, right? And as you mentioned, extreme sport athletes are some of the best at producing flow reliably, right? And the main shift that kind of led to this happened about 25 years ago, and we don't have time to go into what happened. Basically, like these flow triggers became wildly more accessible across the board in action sports. What we've seen as a result in the past 25 years is nearly exponential growth in ultimate human performance, right? Nothing like that has ever happened before. It seems like that level of growth is what is possible, right? It seems like that steep upward curve. So I cannot actually look 10 years in the future, but if we do get better at this, and I have to tell you, I don't think it's an if. Right now, just looking at the business landscape and what I'm seeing, right? As you pointed out, if company A has good access to flow and they can boost their productivity by 500%, and company B, C, and D can't, who's going to win, right? And we're already seeing, if you look at big technology companies, if you look at Amazon, if you look at Facebook, if you look at Google, if you look at what they're doing, if you look at big accounting firms like Deloitte, some of the people with which we work, they're starting to apply this stuff, right, in the workplace. We're seeing it all over with startups as well. So these companies they're ahead of the evolutionary curve. And because of what flow does to abilities, you're not going to be able to keep up without this. So I do think on a certain level, we are moving in this direction. It's going to happen anyways. And the same mechanism that drives everything else forward, the market and capitalism and competition, is going to drive this forward. So I think we will see, and I think what we're seeing again is we're learning how to level up our mental game like never before, right? That's really what's going on. I mean, you have to stop and think that, like, the mainstreaming of these ideas that, like, you can have, like, the human potential movement dates back to the 50s, and they'll go through that whole period in the 60s and 70s where is it primal scream therapy or Esther, all of it seemed to have like something cult-like and a little, maybe it was useful, but there seemed to be a heavy price to pay. And now we've peeled back enough layers that we're at the underlying neurobiology. This is how the brain works. This is what works in the brain. This is how we amplify performance. And this is how you can get at these states without all that nonsense, right? You don't need to join a cult. You don't have to walk on hot coals. You can none of that stuff. There's easier ways in, and so more and more people are getting in. So I do think we're going to see it. I have no idea what it looks like. I just think it's going to be exciting.
Awesome. And so what's next for you? Are you already working on another book, or?
Bold just launched. I have a book coming out in May called Tomorrowland, The Transformation of Science Fiction into Science Fact, that is literally about all the science fiction technologies that have become science fact in the past 25 years and the massive kind of ramifications for culture with the shift this produces. So that's coming out in May. And at the Flow Genome Project, we are about to jump into a Angels List raise, and we're raising $1 million to build the very first Flow Dojo, and it's going to live at Powder Mountain at the Summit Series hostel up there.
Awesome. Are you guys still interested in building one here in Austin?
Yeah, our Learning That lab is there now. We have Austin roots. We like Austin a great deal. So yeah, I don't see us cutting those ties.
Yeah, we're excited to have Jamie Wheel as one of our speakers in 2015 at Voice and Exit.
It's gonna be great. He's a great speaker. Low minds.
We're gonna have fun. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. I appreciate. It was a fun conversation. Appreciate your time, and looking forward to seeing more of this research coming out and following what Flow Genome is doing.
Thanks, Seth. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Awesome, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Be good.
All right.